Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for registering via Eventbrite to be with us today. Welcome to this, our first YouTube live stream by the PMO Professionals, Lessons Learned, Pitfalls and Pointers. We've had 42 people register to join us live today, which Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fans will be pleased to hear on this, which is International Towel Day. I'm your host, Nicole Riley, and in a moment, I'll be introducing my fellow PMO professional, Ken Burrell, author of Learning Lessons from Projects, How It Works, Why It Goes Wrong, and How You Can Do It Better. Make sure you're not watching in full screen mode today, otherwise you won't see the chat, which is where you can let us have your comments and questions during the live stream, which we'll cover towards the end of the hour. You'll also have a chance to win a copy of Ken's book by commenting using the hashtag #WinABook. You only need to do that once to enter, as multiple entries won't count. Unfortunately, those watching a recording of this session won't be able to participate in the competition or the chat, but the recording will stay on YouTube for anyone to revisit after today's live stream. So please do still comment or ask a question if you're watching later, as we'll be checking back regularly. You'll also have the links to download the free resources we'll be talking about during the session. So that's enough for me from now, and I'll hand over to Ken for the main content.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this session. Can you hear me all right? Yep. Okay. Hello, folks, and welcome to this session, Learning Lessons from Projects, Pitfalls and Pointers, with me, Ken Burrell from the PMO Professionals. We'll be going through why are lessons learned important, how it works, how it goes wrong, and how you can do it better. As Nicole mentioned just there are some free resources in this session that you can download. Stay to the end and we'll tell you how to do that. And also there's the opportunity to win a book, copy of my book here, Learning Lessons from Projects. So do stay till the end when we'll be doing the draw for that. Okay, so first of all then, to start with this presentation, I want to be asking you a question, which is this: what proportion of your projects use a lessons learned approach? Hang on a second, this is the wrong presentation. Do bear with me. Apologies. This is the right presentation. If you'd like to come across with me to Menti, so go across to menti.com. So we said at the beginning that you would need to be logged into Menti on a different browser, so with a phone or a tablet or something like that. If you'd like to head over to menti.com, log in there and use the code 88223400, as you can see on the screen there. I've just opened voting. And what I want to ask you today is, what proportion of your projects use a lessons learned approach? So that is to say, of all the projects that you have running in your organization's portfolio, what proportion of them use some kind of lessons learned approach to capture what comes out of there? So if you'd like to, here we go, votes are starting to come in. I'll just set a little timer going for that. Start countdown. There we go. I'll give you 1 minute to put your votes in there, so we can see the votes come in. What I'm asking is, of all the projects that you've got running, which proportion, so what percentage of them, use some sort of approach to capture learning from the projects that you've got running for use on future projects? So we see quite a few coming in at the bottom end there, quite a few under 50%. Some are, well, one spike here, a couple of people voting for 100%. Are there any more votes to come in on that? Yep, a few more still coming in. We'll leave it open for a bit longer. Interesting that we see quite a few under halfway here, and then just a small amount at the top here that moves the average. Still got votes coming in. So looking like about 50%. Just a few seconds left. Just a squeak in at the end there. Okay. So what we're seeing here is that about 50% of your projects that in the audience today use some sort of lessons learned approach. And this ties in reasonably well with the results that I've seen in various polls that I've conducted and when I've asked this question before. About half of projects that portfolios use some sort of lessons learned approach to capture learning for the future, which is not that many. So I think there is an opportunity here for improvement, considerable opportunity. Right, so moving on then to why are lessons learned important? Why is it important for organizations that run projects to learn from their experience? Let's ask that question in a different way. Have you ever thought to yourself, if I'd known then what I know now, I'd have done things differently? I'm sure you have. And the reason is that everything, including running projects, seems easier with hindsight. But gaining your own hindsight is hard and often uncomfortable, sometimes even painful. It's often said that experience is the best teacher, practice makes perfect. And there's a lot of truth in that. But experience is also the most harsh teacher in terms of time and cost because the test comes first and the lesson comes afterwards. But if you can actively learn from other people, you can become better at a task without doing it even once. So I would say to you, learn all you can from the mistakes of others because you won't have time to make them all yourself. Done properly, learning lessons from other people's experience enables you to become better at a task without doing it even once. A good approach to learning lessons from projects gives you access to somebody else's hindsight at somebody else's expense. You can benefit from other people's hindsight without having to go through the sometimes quite uncomfortable experience that created it. And why wouldn't you want that? In practice, though, organisational learning from projects rarely happens, and when it does, it fails to deliver the expected results. Many organisations that do lessons learned are disappointed with the results. The experience of running projects contains insights that ought to be useful to organisations and individuals, but very often this useful knowledge is not fully or effectively exploited. If projects in your organization suffer from the same old problems again and again, then you could benefit maybe from a more rigorous approach to lessons learned. And your organization could benefit from taking lessons learned more seriously and by paying more attention to learning from experience. There's an opportunity here for both individuals and organizations to avoid the pitfalls and the problems that have beset previous projects. So let's take a look at how organizations learn from projects. So how do organizations learn from projects? To understand that, I want to talk you through my own lessons learned process framework. Now, there's no academic research or rigor here. This is based on my own experience of the process that I've been through many times when carrying out or contributing to lessons learned reviews and my observations of the organizations I've worked in, I've heard about from others. It shows the journey of an idea or a project lesson that could be useful or helpful to those running a future project. So let's take a look at this and see how it resonates with you. It starts at the top here with experience. That's the experience of the day-to-day events that happen in the course of running a project. From there, we run round in a loop to reflection. Now, during the reflection stage, we look back on our experience and we identify from within it learning that could be useful in future. Then there's a capture stage where we capture the learning and record it in some sort of persistent form for later use. Storage is where we put the lesson away to be used on a future project. Now, ideally, when we learn something from a project delivery, we'd be able to put that learning into use straight away. But more often than not, we need to store it away for future use because it may not be immediately relevant. That's what this storage stage is about. Then we have retrieval. Now, in this stage, somebody running a project in the future needs to search for and find a lesson in a form that's useful to them in their current situation with the project that they're running now. And lastly, applications. This is about taking action to improve performance of project delivery. If that happens in the same organization that generated the learning, then it shapes their experience of future projects and it closes the loop, as you see there. If the application happens in a different organization, then the lesson and the learning transfers out of it, out of the loop into a different organization. The PMO has a role to play in here. At the capture stage, the PMO can facilitate collection of the learning. So by running surveys, workshops, performing analysis, the PMO can extract transferable learning for other projects. Also, interpretation and documentation is another factor there. At the storage stage, the PMO can curate a knowledge base, set up a repository and maintain it to keep it updated indexed and available for other people. And at the retrieval stage, the PMO can signpost relevant information. So the PMO can direct the managers, project managers of new projects towards information in the repository that could be useful to them in their current situation. And lastly, at the application stage, the PMO can update maybe any project management methodology or framework that they've got in place. So most organizations do, or at least attempt, the capture stage and do that reasonably well. The challenge often lies with retrieval and application later on in the process. So why does it go wrong? Let's take a look at that. Essentially, the lessons learned process can go wrong and does go wrong through a failure of any one of the steps in the framework that I've talked you through. So let's take a look at how that can happen, and we'll focus on each step in turn. And we'll start with reflection. So when reflection goes wrong, we don't reflect. And to think about why we don't reflect, we need to have a think about what the mood of the project team is at the stage in the project where that usually takes place. Now, most people know that it's the best idea is to do lessons learned throughout the course of a project, but in practice, it often gets left to the end of a project. And at the end of the project, what's the typical mood of the typical project team? They're probably going to be elated that delivery has happened, relieved that it's all over, knackered because they've really busted a gut delivering the project. Looking for a new job? Possibly. Suicidal? Hopefully not. Fancy packing the whole thing in and becoming a lumberjack? Maybe. Is anybody in need of a sit down and a good old think about lessons learned? Probably not. Everybody on a project team is pretty keen to go on holiday, like Mary here, who is clearly at the end of a long and particularly taxing project engagement. So compared to the relative glamour and excitement of project delivery and go live and all that kind of stuff, the project closure stage is not very sexy, and as a result, it's often done badly and sometimes not at all. And there are a million excuses that project teams and project managers come up with to avoid doing the closure stage, and particularly lessons learned. For example, my project was too small or too simple. Mary's gone on holiday, she got bored waiting. My project was too small or too simple to do lessons learned. I don't need to do it. It's too late to do lessons learned, everybody's gone, or it's too early because we haven't finished the project yet. I don't have time. My project was successful. There's nothing to be learned from it. We don't have any budget left to do it. Everybody's moved off the project. And there's no point doing lessons learned because nobody looks at them anyway. So the point that we're trying to make here is that lessons learned as part of the closure activity is given a very, very low priority on the priority level of things that the project teams need to do. So moving on next to look at capture, we don't capture lessons learned effectively. Now, as a result of that low priority that I talked about, lessons learned is often done in a half-baked tick box kind of way, and some of what needs to be done is missed out. And there are a number of reasons for this. Sometimes the lessons learned that need to be captured are not suitable for capture. They could reveal something embarrassing, or they could criticize some kind of sacred cow that the organization has that just can't be criticized. Sometimes the lesson that needs to be captured isn't suitable for capture because the very fact that we're recording things and setting them down as part of a lessons learned process tends to favor explicit knowledge. So that's the kind of thing that can be captured easily in terms of facts, figures, diagrams, templates, and that kind of stuff. It's less suitable for tacit information, which is the kind of thing that we learn by doing, or by seeing other people do it, or by experiencing it. Sometimes the people who have the learning think that it's not that valuable to other people, or maybe they think that it's not transferable to other projects. And as a result, it doesn't get captured. Sometimes people are unwilling to share the learning that they have, either because it's something that went wrong, which is embarrassing to have to admit, or something that went well. So if they've got a particular trick or technique that they use to make sure things go well on their projects, they might want to keep it to themselves because they consider it part of their intellectual property and part of their unique selling proposition that they don't want to share with others. So they could be unwilling to share for that reason. Also, lessons learned are often recorded in terms of events and observations, so stuff that happened and stuff that we saw, rather than themes and causes. So the underlying reasons why things happened that way, and therefore why we might want to be doing things differently in future. Sometimes there's personal risk in speaking up about things that went wrong on a project. So there is risk in saying, I did something wrong. If I admit to doing something wrong, it could be career limiting for me. It could have an effect on my future with that organization. There's certainly a risk in saying you did something wrong. So if a project manager or member of the project team wants to call out somebody else who did something wrong, that someone who did something wrong could be someone who has control over that person's career, and again could be career limiting and have an impact on the future of that person within the organization. There's risk in saying that the system is wrong. So the system that's in place in an organization, there's risk there because the system was often set up by somebody who's maybe still around the organization, could be quite senior, and again, could have an effect on the future of that person's career in that organization. There's a tendency to think that anything good that happened on the project is a result of something that I did, and anything bad that happened on the project is a result of circumstances beyond my control. And because it was beyond my control, there's probably no need to record it. If lessons learned gets left to the end of the project, when we shouldn't really be leaving it to the end, but if it does, then our memories of what happened during that project could be foggy or biased. We could be looking at the world through rose-tinted spectacles, or we could have vague recollections of what happened, and as a result, not remember things effectively. Whatever the reasons, it's often the case that useful lessons end up going down the drain at the capture stage. So moving on to storage. Just have a slope. We don't store lessons in an accessible form. Now, I said earlier on that in an ideal situation, we would apply the lessons that we learned straight away on the same project. For example, if you have a construction company that builds schools and they learn a lesson on building a school, they could either put it into use later on the same project or on another project that they've got on the go at the moment, because that's what they do, building schools. But if you think about that school building company, maybe they have an unusual project where they build a block of flats. And if they learn a lesson on that project from building a block of flats that's specific to flat building rather than school building, they can't put it into place. They can't put it into action straight away. They need to hang on to that lesson for the next time they build a block of flats. So they need to store that lesson for future use. Now, when the storage of lessons happens, it often is the case that those lessons get put into things like end of project reports or lessons learned reports, which are usually in the form of documents, maybe word processing documents, maybe spreadsheets, and they tend to get stored on something like a network file share, which maybe doesn't have a lot of structure to it, a bit like this bookshop here. If there's no curation of that repository, then there is no mechanism to ensure that the information that's in there is of decent quality and it's kept up to date. As a result, information gets obscured. If you imagine looking for a particular book in that collection of books, it would be pretty hard. If the repository is not promoted, if it's not publicized, and people don't know how or where to find it, then the organization forgets what it knows, and it becomes very difficult to look for lessons from the past and to apply those to future projects. And over time, the organization will naturally forget what it knows anyway, because people leave the organization and knowledge about the knowledge deteriorates. I'll give you an example of that. So a few years ago, I worked on a strategic program, a fit out and move project for a large insurance company. I was a contractor and I was there for a while. After a year, I was the longest serving member of that strategic program team. And when I joined the program team, there was some knowledge and some information and documents, but it was badly organized, difficult to find stuff. And although I was the longest serving member on that program team, when people asked me questions about ancient history of the program, I was unable to find it for them because the information repository wasn't well organized like this. So lessons learned are no use if you can't find them. It's important to get rid of old lessons to make sure that the up-to-date stuff is visible and available. If you look at this picture here, there's a book down in the sort of bottom right-hand corner of the picture that looks like it's been there for a very long time. Is that information up-to-date and relevant still? Probably not. Is that book getting in the way of finding other books that are possibly more relevant? Maybe. So it's important to keep things up to date. Moving on to the retrieval and application stage, we don't review and apply past lessons. Now, I said earlier on, most organizations do capture reasonably well, or at least they have a go at it. The problem with the lessons learned process for a lot of organizations lies later on in the process with retrieval and application. And to think about why that could be, we need to think about the mood of a project team at the beginning of a project, which is the golden time to look for lessons learned from previous projects. So what does a project team feel like at the beginning of a project? Excited? Enthusiastic? Keen to get cracking? Probably. In need of a good sit down and a rummage through a lessons learned database? Not so much. So project teams don't review past lessons from past projects because they don't have time. They're in a hurry to get started, like Gordon here, who is clearly just being given an assignment off to the right-hand side of the picture, and he's running off to it with his project management bag of tools there. Now, on his way to his new project assignment, Gordon's thinking to himself, have we done anything like this before? But what often happens in that situation is that up pops an overbearing, domineering sponsor who just wants people to get on with it, just get on with it. So Gordon doesn't have time to look back over those lessons from the past. He's in a hurry to demonstrate progress to his sponsor. He's in a hurry to get some brownie points, get some scores on the board, get some runs on the scoreboard. He doesn't have the time and money to look over past lessons, which is a shame because that means that later on in the project, he's likely to need to find time and money to repeat mistakes, time and money to do things once wrong and then again properly. Another problem is that we like to believe that we and our current project are unique, a bit like this snowflake here. And in fact, that idea of uniqueness is baked into most definitions of what a project is. But that idea of uniqueness is also used as a justification for not looking elsewhere, for not looking more widely to find out what other people have done before and use that learning to inform what we're doing now. It leads to project teams reinventing the wheel, which makes them seem innovative, but is not necessarily the best use of time and money. It's almost as if project teams had a creed. No one has ever built one of these or managed as much complexity as this, or worked under such tight constraints. So nothing that has ever happened in any project before could possibly be applicable to the one that we are running now. My project is different from all the others. I took this picture on my walk into work one morning because I thought that leaf there was a beautiful illustration of how projects can be similar to each other, but somehow different. So I took the picture, thought, yep, very nice. But then it occurred to me that something was a little bit odd was going on because those leaves on the floor could only have come from one tree. There was a sort of park area, but there was only one tree nearby. So all those leaves came from that one tree. And I thought, well, how is it that that leaf is white and all the others are brown? So I looked a bit closer, picked up the white leaf, and on the other side it was brown. So something about leaf aerodynamics means that all of those leaves had landed brown side down, and that one, sorry, brown side up, and that one had landed brown side down. I picked up the brown leaves, and on the other side they were white. So something about that one meant it had landed the other way up. The point is that on first inspection, that leaf looked completely different from the rest, but on closer inspection, it was actually the same. Which makes me think that could that same idea apply to projects? Could projects be more similar to each other than they first appear? I think they probably do. My project is different from all the others, but also somehow the same. Okay, so we've taken a quick spin through the stages in that lessons learned loop that I talked about earlier on. I'm going to go back to Menti now, and let's go to the next question. Now, having thought a bit about those stages in the loop, reflection, capture, storage, retrieval, and application, I'd like you to have a think about how that works in your organization. So can you tell me, please, how efficient you think each stage is? So thinking about reflection, imagine you had 100 useful ideas or potentially useful ideas on a project. Of those 100 useful ideas, how many of them get identified through a reflection stage in your organization? Give me the number on here. Yeah, so you need to be in Menti, where we were before, using the code 88223400, menti.com. And then thinking about the capture stage. So if you imagine you had 100 useful ideas that had been identified as part of a reflection on a project, how many of those get written down in a reusable form? So during the capture stage, what percentage of those potentially useful ideas get written down and captured in a form that's useful to future projects? I don't see any votes coming in. Have we got open voting? I believe we have. I'll start a countdown. 1 minute. Something happening? No votes coming in. I'll keep explaining. And then moving on to storage. If you had 100, here we go. Fabulous. If you had 100 useful ideas that were captured, of those 100 useful ideas, what percentage make it into some kind of lessons learned repository? And it's not enough for that to be just in a repository. It needs to be a repository that's categorized, that's indexed, that's kept up to date. So what percentage of them get into a repository? And then moving on, when you come to a future project, imagine you had 100 potentially useful ideas that are tucked up in a repository. Of those, how many are retrieved, so got out of the repository, pulled out, and then of those at the application stage, of those ideas, what percentage actually get put into use on projects? So we've got a few seconds left in the voting. I can see some numbers coming in here, and voting is now closed. And as I said earlier on, most organizations at least have a crack at doing the early stages and do them reasonably well, and the problem comes later on with retrieval and application. This again is consistent with where I've done this kind of poll before. I typically see figures around about the 50% mark. So if we move back to the presentation then, 50% was in the poll, and that's consistent with what I've seen before. So as a result, organizations don't learn as much as we could. Now this bucket line here is an illustration of it's an analogy, if you like, for the lessons learned process. If you imagine at one end of the bucket line, you start with a bucket full of water, and that's like your 100 useful ideas. But at each stage through the process, some of those ideas get lost because, as we've just seen, they're not 100% efficient. And the point I want to make here is that it doesn't matter if you do one or two stages really well. It's the cumulative effect of all of them that's really important. So if we, if you take your bucket of ideas and you lose some of the water, you can never get that water back in the bucket again. It's gone. It's lost forever. So we can illustrate that with this Sankey diagram here. If we imagine that the process is actually quite efficient, so this one here is based on 75% efficiency at each step. What happens if you multiply 75% of 75% of 75%? You do that for 5 steps. At the end here, at the right-hand end, you end up with only 24% of those useful ideas retained, and the other 75% are lost. I'm just going to skip the quotes because we don't have enough time for that. So what can we do about this? Well, I believe that we have an opportunity here to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past by building on the learning of others. And we can do that by taking how we did it before, applying our experience, and changing how we do it in the future. So if we take the lessons learned loop model that I showed you earlier on, we can apply that in a variety of contexts, and the time scales of how long it takes to do things and the scale in terms of what we're able to achieve depend on the context. So if we apply it in a project context, and we think about a short loop with frequent reviews. So in a project, probably we have weekly project team review meetings, and if we incorporate in there a lessons learned activity for things that happen weekly, and we can review how we can do things better. Maybe we have a monthly steering committee where we talk to stakeholders, the sponsor. We can again do a little lessons learned review on that. We have an opportunity to do things on that weekly, monthly cycle, so quite a short cycle, and we are maybe able to apply the learning to later on in the same project, so we can skip out the storage and retrieval stages. We're able to apply things straight away. So quite a short loop, able to get things done quite quickly. Maybe small things, but quite quick to have an impact. We could also apply the same idea to a program context. So here we have a collection of projects, slightly bigger loop. We might be conducting our reviews at the end of each project, or at the end of each stage of a project, or tranches of a delivery, or maybe implementation go lives, and we're thinking about implementing the learning on later projects within the same program. So here we would probably need to make use of a storage and retrieval stage, but we can do that. Slightly wider impact, slightly longer to take effect. So that's the program application. So what can we do better? How can we make a change to what we do? First one I can suggest here is that we can adopt a more reflective approach. So if we want to reduce the amount of time that we spend repeating the mistakes of the past, then we need to increase the amount of time that we spend reviewing the lessons of the past. It's kind of a invest now to save later kind of thing. So we can adopt a more reflective approach. And we've prepared a little template here that can help you do that. Effectively, what we're doing here is we're making observations, things that happen during the project. We're having a think about those and identifying the causes and then making a recommendation. As it says here, there's a download available for this. Stay till the end of the session here and we'll tell you how to get your hands on that. Another thing that we can do is to share our successes and our scars. So I mentioned earlier on that people are reluctant to share their successes because they want to keep them to themselves, but we really ought to be sharing those for the greater good of the project portfolio in our organization, or maybe even the project profession. We also need to share our scars to admit our fallibility and to help others not to make the same mistakes that we did. One way of doing that is through a lessons learned video blog. So there are a number of ways that you can share lessons using video. So you can record a lessons learned presentation. Maybe at the end of a project, instead of writing a report, a project team could make a presentation to the rest of the change community in an organization, and that could be recorded. Or people could do talking heads like I'm doing this to a camera, or people could be interviewed for their lessons. But the point is that they share their successes and their scar stories. It's not difficult or expensive to do. You can use your phone, so there'll be software on your phone for video recording and for editing. So it doesn't have to be difficult or expensive to do. If you wanted to do a bit more of a job on it, you could edit it into a little program. So maybe somebody in the PMO could do that and put it in some sort of lessons learned repository, maybe something like SharePoint or a private YouTube listing, and add contact details to that lessons learned interview or that talking head, so that if the person who has the learning and the person who's imparting the learning has left the organization, then people who need to apply the learning can get in touch with them. So something like a LinkedIn profile would be good here. If that piece of lessons learned gets put into some sort of repository where the users of the repository can tag it with their own kind of categorization or with likes, give them the thumbs up there, then it helps the curation process, and it helps other users to see what pieces of information have been useful. So it's something that could be relatively quick and easy to do, and which promotes networking. If you want to see what one of those looks like, you can take a look at our YouTube channel or this playlist here, Scary Scars, but we'll be showing you that link again at the end and sending you some information too. So the next thing we can do, as well as adopting a more reflective approach and sharing successes and scars, is to make sure that that we articulate the lessons to inspire action. So most lessons that get recorded aren't really lessons learned; they're more like lessons observed. It's people documenting what they saw and what happened, and that doesn't really do the job for making things better in the future. So here is another template that helps you to visualize how to do that. So what we're suggesting here is that you identify an observation, but as well as that, you need to identify the cause. Why did it happen? What was the underlying reason? Make a recommendation to what people do in future and take action to make sure that happens. It helps also as well if you tell the lesson in a story form. So you talk through the situation, target, action, the result, and a recommendation. And again, this resource is available as a download. Stay tuned to the end, and we'll tell you how to get your hands on it. As well as that, we have this little resource here on how to articulate learning to help others. So this just helps you to express the lesson in this STAR format: situation, target, action, result, and recommendation. It helps you to think through. It's got some questions there to help you document it. Again, this is available as a download. Stay tuned to the end, and we'll tell you how to get your hands on it. So to do this stuff well requires specialist skills. To lead a group through capturing this kind of stuff does require specialist skills. There are a number of ways that you can do this. So you may have facilitators in-house that you would use for group retrospectives. You may want to send some of your own people on training. But what we would suggest that you consider is having your retrospective run independently. And there are a number of reasons why this is a good idea. So if you have your retrospective run independently by someone who's outside the project and outside the organization, then it can reduce bias. Now, you might think that at the end of the project, the ideal person to run a retrospective, a lessons learned review on that project would be the project manager. And that works, but it doesn't always give the best results, particularly if the project team members or the people in the retrospective think that the project manager might be indulging in a little bit of manipulation with their facilitation. So facilitation, manipulation, that's facipulation. So they might want to be focusing on things that make themselves look good and downplaying the things maybe that don't show them in such a good light. If you have somebody independent come in to run that retrospective for you, then they have no agenda, and the whole thing can be a whole lot less biased. So that's one of the reasons there. It levels the playing field. Now, for the best representation of viewpoints in a lessons learned retrospective, it's good to have people from across the organization. So senior people, junior people, maybe even the sponsor, stakeholders. And that's great, as I say, for viewpoints, but it's not so good for contribution. If you have a group of people in the same room, and some of them are very senior, then what can sometimes happen is that the rest of the group can be a bit in awe of that senior person, or maybe even just a little bit scared of them, and as a result, maybe they don't contribute quite the way they would want to. Also, if you have very junior people from the team in a review, they may have some very useful observations to make, but they may get a little bit trampled on by the more senior people. If you have your retrospective independently facilitated, those guys have got the skills and the techniques to make sure that people contribute from right across the group. So it encourages contribution and levels the playing field in terms of the status of the people in the review. Better behavior, more contribution. Right. So if you have a team working together on a project very closely over an extended period of time, then they can get to know each other very well, and they can get to the point where there's a lot of banter going on, a lot of in-jokes, people not taking things too seriously because they know each other so well. And in some cases, that kind of banter can cross the line into almost bullying territory when it's behind closed doors and when people aren't looking. So if you have somebody independent come in to facilitate your review, it can help to reduce some of that kind of banterous bullying behavior, and as a result, people can take the retrospective process more seriously. So the team are more likely to behave better in public because it's kind of a public thing having an independent person there. So with that better behavior, you're likely to get more contribution, and you won't have people being shut down. People can feel that they can be heard, their views can be heard in the retrospective. It enables the asking of naive questions. So in most organizations, the culture of the organization leads to ingrained behaviors, so ways of doing things around here, but it also leads to things that we can't talk about, things that are a bit taboo in most organizations. If you have someone independent come in to facilitate review, then they bring with them that independent viewpoint that enables them to ask those naive, powerful questions. And those powerful questions can often yield the most insightful answers. So asking naive questions, a good thing. It helps you to navigate the minefield. So if you have a project where something went really badly wrong or some real challenges happened, then a lessons learned review that's facilitated internally can turn into a bit of a blame fest, a witch hunt, sort of like where to pin the blame, who are we going to sacrifice for this thing that went wrong. So if you have somebody independent to come in and facilitate that retrospective, then their independence can create the kind of collaborative environment that you need to encourage people to contribute to the full. So if your lessons, if your project has lessons in it that are just too hot to handle, it can be really helpful to have somebody independent to come and do that for you. And it saves you work when your energy is lowest. Now, we've said a couple of times that lessons learned is something that should happen throughout the course of a project, but in reality, it's often left to the end of the project. And at that stage, the energy of the project team is really low. And as a result, any kind of lessons learned review or retrospective can get done half-heartedly, and it runs the risk of being ineffective. But if you bring somebody in who's independent, then they have a fresh set of eyes on the project, on the organization, and fresh energy to bring to the situation. So it's a good way of making sure that lessons learned review, that retrospective, is done thoroughly by somebody independent. Okay, so that's that. And we can help with this. At the PMO Professionals, we can help you with this process. So we have a couple of things that we can offer, of which one is learn lessons from your projects. So this is a service where essentially you outsource the lessons learned review process to us, the PMO Professionals. You give us names and contact details for people who you want to be involved in the process. So people who are members of the project team, maybe stakeholders, maybe people who are members of the user community, so the people that had the change done to them. And we will run on your behalf a web survey with a few questions in it to get some viewpoints. We'll schedule a workshop for the most appropriate time for all the people that you want to be there. That can be a remotely run workshop, or it can be on your site, whichever's easiest. So we'll run that workshop. We'll challenge your guys with questions to identify the learning from within that project, and then we'll compile all the results for you into a report or an actions portal. So we can create an online portal for you with actions, with due dates and owners and all that kind of stuff to make sure that something happens as a result. So that's learn lessons from your projects. That's how we can help you. Coming back to the application of the lessons learned loop framework, we can apply that in a couple of other contexts. So we've looked at project, we've looked at program. If we now think a bit wider than that and we think about portfolio, so this is where we think about a bigger loop, and we're reviewing the lessons that we can learn across a whole bunch of projects. So all the projects that are going on within an organization or within part of the organization. And we're reviewing the lessons that we can learn across all of those projects and looking for changes that we can bring to bear across standardized processes or templates for the benefit of all the future projects that come afterwards. So a bigger loop takes longer to apply things, maybe a bit more effort, but because we're talking about all the projects within a portfolio of an organization, potentially bigger benefits to have there. Thinking still wider, we can maybe think about applying this kind of thinking to the entire project management profession. And what we're seeking to do there is to foster the kind of mindset where people go seeking for information, and they ask the questions: what have people done this before? What can we learn from it? So again, going back to what we can do differently, review the organizational approach. So we're thinking here about the approach that an organization takes towards learning lessons from projects. And again, there's a template that we've created here that asks questions and encourages you to think about each stage in the lessons learned loop model that we showed you earlier, and to identify ways that your organization can improve the way that it does things. As it says there, download is available. Stay tuned to the end, and we'll tell you how to get your hands on that. For the PMO Professionals, we can also help with this area with a service that we call Leapfrog Your Learning. So what we do here is we come into your organization and give you your entire change community a presentation on lessons learned, the value of it, why it's important, much like this presentation, in fact. And then afterwards, we have a workshop where collectively we evaluate your organization's approach to how it does lessons learned, and we identify ways to do it better. Like the Learn Lessons from Your Project service, we have a think about what we can do to improve things and compile that into a report, or we can create for you the same kind of web portal with actions, due dates, owners, and all that kind of stuff to make sure that those actions happen, and we can follow up months later to make sure that things are really happening. But is this enough? So is this, what we've talked about so far, enough to help you to improve your approach to lessons? So I'm hoping that by talking you through this process and by giving you ways that you can improve at each stage, you guys can make enough marginal gains in enough areas to do the trick. There are people in the project management community, though, that think that the lessons learned approach is broken, and they would suggest that we use data analytics instead. So I would say to that data analytics is great. It's an emerging technology based on analysing the variance of actual performance from the expectation and looking for what's called lead indicators. So that's statistics or pieces of information that predict future importance, maybe using software, artificial intelligence, and that kind of thing. And that can be great, but the thing about that is that you need to have good quality data and lots of it. And for an organization that's relatively low on the project management maturity spectrum, that can be quite hard to obtain. across a profession, it's quite hard to share information because there's all kinds of intellectual property considerations that come into play here. Who does it really belong to? What you can do with it? I mean, we're making progress in the world of data analytics, but I would say that if you're in a relatively low project management maturity organization, you probably get more benefit from looking at how you approach your lessons learned approach and improving that. So yeah, maybe data analytics, but certainly for lower maturity organizations, you're probably better off improving your lessons learned approach through the techniques that I've talked about today. So that's it for now. I'd like to draw this bit to a close, and I'd like to leave you with a thought, which is that if you take just one thing away from today, then I'd like you to take away the words of a university lecturer of mine, who told us the best way to find out how to do something is to ask somebody who's already done it. So I'd just like to close that part of the presentation and open things up for questions. So I'll hand back to Nicole.
Hi, thanks very much, Ken. So we've had loads of questions come through in the chat, so I'll pick a few out for you and put you on the spot, and hopefully you can answer them live on air for everyone. So first of all, we've had one through from Alan. How do we prevent lessons learned sessions turning into a search for the guilty?
Yeah, okay. So I've come across this before. I think the best way to do it is to set out at the beginning of the review some ground rules for how the retrospective session is going to work. So ask the attendees how they want the session to work, and to effectively set their own ground rules for how the session is going to work. And then if that's not working the way that we would expect, to draw their attention to what's going on and point out what's happening. I think you need to start with the belief that nobody comes to work with the intention of doing a bad job. So if things go wrong on a project, then it's usually not intended. And people are usually doing the best that they can with the information that they had available to them at the time. So just to remind people during the session that that's what we're there for, and we're there to try and work out how to do things better in the future and not to apportion blame.
Great, thank you. So next one we've got through is from Rob. So I'll just pop that up on the screen for you. What tricks and tips are there to encourage the project team from doing lessons learned if there is a level of ambivalence or disinterested? And that's assuming that the benefit of lessons learned has already been clearly explained and demonstrated.
What tips and tricks are there to encourage the project team from doing lessons learned? So do we mean from to do a lessons learned activity, or to carry out the lessons that have been learned from doing the activity? What do we think we mean there?
Let's think about the first one of actually doing the activity, and then maybe we could touch on the second one and address both.
Okay, so I think really it's about getting an understanding that the experience of delivering projects has in it lessons that ought to be useful. There should be things that people have learned from having that experience, from whether it was a good experience that went well, or a bad experience where something went wrong. Typo. Okay, to take part in lessons learned. Okay, so I think it's about thinking to people, if you had been able to start a project with the benefit of somebody else's hindsight, how useful would that have been? And it's about being that hindsight for somebody else. Yeah, it's about providing that hindsight for somebody else so that they can learn from what you've experienced, and avoid making the same mistakes that you do.
Hopefully that's answered your question, Rob. Let us know in the comments if we've not quite covered it. So we've got one here from David Mitchell. So I'll just put that one up on the screen. What's the best way to land lessons learned with senior leaders starting a big program?
Okay, So I guess what he means is there is about the senior leaders being the guerrilla sponsor that popped up during Gordon's during
Yeah,
Gordon's run to his new project. Yeah, that's a good one. So I think it's about trying to identify the pitfalls before stumbling across them. So it's likely that if you're about to undertake a project, it's likely that that's not the first time the organization's done that kind of project, and it's likely that there should be some learning elsewhere in the organization of people that have done that kind of project before and the kinds of things that they came up against. So even if you don't have a lessons learned repository where it's all nicely filed and categorized and indexed and all the rest of it, it should be possible for someone who's been around for a while, and I think most organizations have them, somebody sitting in the corner with grey hair maybe who's been in that organization for a while and knows where, remembers stuff that happened and knows where the bodies are buried, that can point you in the right direction to speak to somebody who may have experienced something like that before. And it's about investing a little bit of time to try and avoid making those same mistakes again.
absolutely. Thanks for that. So we've had another one through from Becca. So let's just put that one on the screen. So Becca's asking, what are your top tips for getting lessons learned happening during projects as well as at the end?
That's a good one. So I think that it's a kind of thing that can be incorporated really nicely into a weekly project team meeting. If you imagine a typical weekly project team meeting where people sort of update each other on progress, challenges they're facing and all that kind of stuff, as well as that, it can be useful to have a little slot maybe at the end of that weekly project team meeting, stuff I have learned. This week I learned that, and during that section of the meeting, people can talk about things that maybe were a bit of a challenge to them, maybe were a bit of a surprise, maybe something went a bit wrong and they had to fix it. But they can share that stuff with other members of the team, and it could be little things like what would be called productivity hacks. So a little trick that they've learned with Excel, or something like that. By modeling those kind of behaviors, project managers in particular could volunteer their own ones in the project team meeting and maybe go around the room and ask people to volunteer theirs. But essentially it fosters a culture of learning and sharing experience and being vulnerable or honest enough to share things even if they go wrong. Yeah, for the good of the team.
Good of the team. Thank you. So just a final one here, one from me actually, if you'll just indulge us. So can you tell us more about how we can get hold of those downloads you talked about?
I can, yes. I was right at the beginning of the presentation. It is actually the wrong copy of the presentation, so the links in here are wrong. So I won't put them on the screen, but you can see some links scrolling across the ticker at the bottom there. So those are short links that you can use to get hold of the information. But essentially, if you're watching this live, then we will email you afterwards with a copy with the means to access the recording of this session. And we'll also email you with details of how to sign up to our approximately monthly newsletter and download all those resources in one hit. So we'll be talking to you after the event with an email, and you can do it.
Brilliant, thank you. So what we have now to cover is our win a book section of the prize draw. So thank you, Ken. We'll put you back on screen shortly. So we're going to do this live. This is going to be great fun. Let's just pop that on full screen for you so we can run the draw. Let me just get into my winner book draw. So we've got 4 entries. This is completely random, and here we go. Oh, Alan, brilliant. Alan's our winner today. So Alan, thanks very much. We'll be in touch with you after the event just to get your details and get that sent across to you. And brilliant. Well done. So let me just add Ken back into the stream here. So I think that's all from us today, Ken, isn't it? It's just a time to wrap it up.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much for everyone who's joined us today here live or is watching the recording here on our YouTube channel. We are together, the PMO Professionals, and this has been Lessons Learned, Pitfalls and Pointers. We'd love it if you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel, and click the bell if you want to be notified about more content from us as it's released. We do plan to live stream each month on a different PMO related topic. And in the meantime, you can get in touch with us either via our website, which is should be on the screen now. And if not, we're on most of the other social media channels, including LinkedIn. So do drop us a line. We're on them all. So goodbye. So long. And thanks for all the fish. And remember, if you have a project related problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find us, maybe you can hire the PMO Professionals.